You're listening to the Fierce Valley Podcast, episode 158, Fatness as a Disease and O-Word Medicine's Giant Flaws. Let's do it! Hello. Welcome to our episode today. I'm your host, Vinny Walsby. My pronouns are they, them. I'm in Vancouver, which is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. Welcome to the show. I am feeling like I have a vulnerability hangover from the last episode where we had Mummy on, especially because I was watching Blackbird on Apple TV. It's about a presumed serial killer and someone who is serving a long sentence who's been sent to the prison that presumed serial killer is in and tries to get him to reveal where he's buried bodies. Anyway, and so he's pretending to be his friend, even though he's totally creeped out by him. It's really good. It's only 6 episodes. But yeah, I'd recommend checking it out. Anyway, it's called Blackbird. The serial killer was like, do you want to have sex with your mummy? And the guy was like disgusted and was like, mother. And he was like, hang on, is he more disgusted that he said mummy, or is he more disgusted about the other thing? And I was like, oh god. That's, because I call mummy, and I know so for some people that might be really weird, and so I'm just like, oh god, everyone thinks I'm really weird, everyone thinks this, that, and whatever. Oh, why? Why is my brain like this? No, I'm not a serial killer just because I call my mum mummy. Many people do. Like, isn't it so funny where our brains go? Like, people are so creeped out by you that basically you're a serial killer. My brain is like, and the other side of my brain is like, no, they're not. And then that brain that's shaming me is like, yes, they are. Oh my god, did you hear? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so yeah, fun times. So, hey, in the last few episodes, I've been telling you about Ko-fi, which is kind of like Patreon, but better because they don't take as much money from the creators. And I said that to create the podcast, it takes $680 a month. Basically, roughly, it costs me $170 per episode to produce the show, and that doesn't factor in my time or labor. And so 4 shows a month, that's an average of 680. And so to sustain the podcast with no adverts, if you can subscribe on Ko-fi, that would be incredible. And so far we have had $235 come in. Amazing! However, most of those are one-offs. And so that means like you can either just buy me a coffee, which is $5, or you can subscribe, which is $5. You also get, if you subscribe, the Size Diversity Resource Guide, which is a 37-page guide with all the fat positive people to follow, all the books to read, where to shop, secret fat community Facebook groups to join, science, TED Talks, everything. Podcasts, did I say that? And it's in this one big resource guide that I have been taking years to create. Literally, me and my virtual assistant together. Anytime I see any type of resource, I send it to her and she updates the spreadsheet. It is a labor of love. And so literally years of resources have been poured into this, and you can have it for $5. What? I like it. Amazing. Go to ko-fi.com/Fierce Fierce Fatty. And then there's the option to just do the $5 one time or $5 ongoing. And so where we're at so far is I've got 185 one-off and $50 subscriptions. And so $50 ongoing every month. I got the one-offs a lot because I think a lot of people liked the Wegovy Ozempic post. And so they sent a little coffee for that, which is wonderful. Honestly, like, and the little notes that people are sending is just so nice. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Also, I'm thinking about adding other perks. There are other perks, actually, like get shout out on social media and get a card from me in the post, things like that. But even more, and I'm thinking of releasing the podcast on Ko-fi a week early, and then everyone else can have it a week later. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Who knows? If you want to support me and that's something that's available for you, wonderful. If not, and you're just like, shut up, I just want your free content, that's fine too. But it would mean a lot to me if we could make it so that the podcast supported itself and get to $680 a month. And we're at 50 recurring. So let's do it. I'll give you another update in a month. Okay. So I won't talk about it for a month. Okay. So, as I mentioned, I did a couple of posts. We had the 2-part episode on Wegovy /Ozempic /semaglutide / all the other weight loss drugs, whatever. 2-part episode. So I put 2 posts out on Instagram. If you didn't see those posts and you've just listened to the episode and you want a roundup of everything that I was talking about, not everything because it was like 3 hours of content, but, a roundup of the key concepts, then go to my Instagram, fierce.fatty, and you will see that there. So we got a lot of responses from people being like, oh my God, this is fucked up. And oh my God, this happened to me. La, 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 la. And someone from the Pittsburgh Gazette. Let's see. Is it Pittsburgh Post? Yeah, Pittsburgh Post Gazette. A science journalist reached out who was doing an article on Ozempic, Wegovy, la la la. So she reached out. I said, send me the questions, because I don't necessarily like doing voice interviews, because I have less control with people I don't have a relationship with, or especially a journalist, because sometimes I worry, because of my experience with the BBC, that I could say something that could be taken out of context and then twisted and used to harm the fat lib community. And so I really want every single word to be thought about, so that it can't be I mean, I was going to say something like, you say something ridiculous, and then, which is, not even something that you're saying, but they piece together words, and it's like, this is what this has said, that person has said, and you're like, what? Hang on, I didn't say that. But then, anyway, so I wrote a response to her, to the questions. I really appreciated the questions, and I appreciate the chance for this, for a fat activist to be in the Pittsburgh Gazette, or to be in any media when people are talking about Ozempic, because what we found out in an episode a few episodes ago was that fat bias is rampant in the media. And so when people are talking about things to do with fat people, they go to, quote unquote, O-word medicine experts, who are thin people who want to erase fat people from the planet because they think that they're diseased and terrible. And they don't talk to fat people, and they don't talk to fat activists. And so this is a journalist doing it right. Hopefully. I don't know. I don't know what the article is going to say. The journalist is a straight-sized person, and is a science writer, and so everyone has bias, and so I don't know the amount of her bias, but I'm hoping that I'm hoping it's like a critical piece. This is my dreams. These are my dreams. I'm dreaming. Who knows? The piece might come out and they say, fuck fat people. Let's kill them all with Wegovy. Anyway, so I'm going to share with you the questions and answers because, I don't want to brag, but I felt really good about the clear communication and breakdown of these big topics into kind of smaller sound bites. And she's not going to quote it all. Obviously, it's like 3 pages of, no, hang on, Jesus. 6 pages, Jesus. I wrote 6 pages. Obviously not, it's not all, it's her questions as well. Of things around the idea that fatness is a disease and O-word medicine and the flaws around that. In case your gorgeous noggin is thinking, but hang on a minute, this is what I've seen. And I've seen doctors say that it's not fat people's fault that they're fat and use liberatory language. And so should I then learn from them, or should I then follow what they're saying? Because it's kind of confusing. It's really confusing. And some people have fallen into that, oh yeah, fatness is a disease, because if we say fatness is a disease, then it's really helpful, and la la la. So anyway, I'm going to read the questions and then I'm going to read you my answers and then give you some links to science and talk about some extra things and blah-biddy bloop bloop. Okay, so first question. Talk to me about your work with educating employees on implicit bias and weight-based discrimination. What is the main message you hope to get across? What are people's typical responses starting out versus when they finish the training? So in case you don't know, something I do, aside from talking to myself on a podcast, is I go into companies. I don't go in, it's all virtual. I'll pretend to go in and talk about anti-fat bias. I love it. I also talk to, organizations or groups of people, or, like say a group of dietitians or whatever. And so this is my response. The responses are generally positive. Some people struggle to come to terms with the idea that the weight-centric health paradigm is deeply flawed, whereas others realize how much bias they hold and are excited at creating more positive experiences and interactions with fat folks. People are asking for this training more and more as organizations now better understand that anti-fat bias is a huge problem and something that's not been addressed before in meaningful ways and actually been encouraged. Imagine, this is me talking, well, it was me talking before, but imagine you're, the average company where everyone's, around the cooler being like, oh my God, have you tried this diet? La, 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 la. I feel so fat or whatever. And then you have a trainer that comes in that talks about anti-fat bias. A lot of the people are going to be like, what? What are they talking about? Of course diets work. And that's going to be difficult for people. Like, remember when you were in diet culture and if someone came to you and said, hey, by the way, there's no way to make yourself smaller, you'd be like, fuck off. Go away. Don't be silly. Of course there is. Of course there is. I mean, I've tried 50 times in my life and I've managed to make myself temporarily thinner all of those times. So don't be silly. And then the idea that you can be fat and just live your life, that is very, very difficult. Whereas, a few years ago, I feel like people were more kind of like, fuck you. Whereas now people are more like, makes sense. To the people who were kind of on the fence, they're more like, okay, makes sense. Because I feel like we're being exposed to the message more and more that diets don't work. It's not as wildly radical. It still is wildly radical, but as like 5 years ago, which is great. And so now we're seeing a lot of people being like, whoa, this is fucked up. We should stop doing this, which is awesome. So my main message with the training is basically, it depends. Everyone's training is different. Like some people want to focus on this or that, different things. But main message is there's 100 years worth of data showing us that there is no reliable way to lose weight long term. You cannot tell a person's health status from their body size. Even if fat people could lose weight, and all of them are unhealthy, they still deserve access, rights, and belonging. So that's the thing is I will say that, listen, I know some people cannot, absolutely 100%, doesn't matter about what the evidence say, they can't get behind the idea that it's not possible to lose weight and that fat people can be healthy. And so that's I'm going to say it's fine. It's not fine, but, whatever. They can't get behind that. But even if fat people could easily lose weight and they're choosing not to because they're like, some evil person who's like, I'm going to drain the world of resources in order to be fat and eat everyone and raw, even if fat people were like that, by the way, fat people don't have some master plan to drain the resources of the world. Even if we were like that, fat people still deserve belonging, access, rights, etc., right? Because we're people. Anti-fat bias stems from anti-black racism, ableism, and healthism. Also, Protestant Reformation. Make your workplace welcoming for fat people because a huge population of the workforce is fat. Unlearn your own fat phobia because we all have it. And finally, anti-fat bias is so 1997. Let's do better. So 1997. It's so old school. It's so, I'm just like, it's so, are we still talking about this? Like, are people still talking about this? And I know, like, I feel like I might be a little bit out of touch with the realities of the day-to-day world because I live my own bubble of fat positivity and I don't have co-workers who, because it's just me and Dougal. Dougal doesn't talk about going on diets. He just says, can I have a cuddle, give me some treats, whatever. He never talks about diets. I love him for that. So, I feel like it's really just, it is old school, but of course there's still so many people talking about it because it's super pervasive. So, okay. So the next question from the journalist, what led you to do a deep dive into the Ozempic study? And I said, people were asking me about it and I love digging into the details behind flashy headlines. I also saw a lot of influencers talking about it and I worry that people consuming that content would feel pressurized by anti-fat bias and social media and doctors to take something without understanding the risks or outcomes. So something that I thought that was really alarming is fat influencers who many people presumed were fat positive taking Ozempic or Wegovy for weight loss. And that was, to me, people felt like it was a breach of trust. For me, I mentioned this before, unless someone explicitly states they are fat positive, fat liberation, health at every size, even then, you don't know. Unless they explicitly say, I think fat people deserve equal access rights, etc. I know that diets don't work, then you don't know what that person is really, what they think, even if they are fat. And so we can't be surprised then if someone then starts saying, hey, let's go on a diet or whatever, unless they explicitly say that they are fat positive, unfortunately. And I think that's really difficult for people. If we're following someone and we presume we know them and know what they are thinking, and then they do something which is the opposite of what we presume that they are thinking, it can be very distressing. And that we see that a lot when fat celebs lose weight. It's very difficult. And again, people can do what they want, right? It's their bodies. But there's that sadness. And also being like, well, they're doing it. Maybe should I? So anyway, okay. So then her name is Hannah, the interviewer. Hannah asks, I have some specific study questions. In your Instagram post on the drug, you mentioned that it was ineffective because participants gained weight back after stopping Ozempic. I asked a few doctors who work with patients with O-word about this, and their response was that this evidence helps support the notion that O-word is a complex and chronic disease similar to any other chronic disease like high blood pressure or cancer. Patients who stop taking blood pressure medication also find that their BP climbs back up. Okay, so that sentence, that paragraph, you would potentially hear that and be like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, these O-word doctors, they're looking out for me. They're not blaming me. They're saying there's something wrong with fatness. There's a disease mechanism happening, and it's not that I'm greedy and lazy and an awful person. So I can understand how someone could read that and absolutely be like, okay, because it's not like, hey, fatty, you're a piece of shit. That would be like, well, fuck you. This is offering a sense of kindness almost, right? And it comes from a doctor. Oh my goodness. So they must know about what is a disease. And so it's beginning to make sense. But hold them horses. So my response, this evidence shows exactly what we know about weight loss interventions for the last 100 years. Manipulating your body size does not work long term. Even if you keep taking Wegovy for weight loss, the weight begins to come back on at week 60, which is exactly what the Wegovy study showed. So notice how in that question, we're ignoring the fact that you keep taking the drug and then you will stop, your weight begins to come back on. And then they're referring to, there was a follow-up study that people who stopped taking it, 2/3 of their weight was back on within a year. And so the doctor is saying, well, you need to keep taking it forever because this shows that it's a disease. And what I'm saying is it just shows that our bodies do not want to be artificially manipulated to be smaller and will fight back. Even when they're taking the drug, even if you continue with the diet, even if, right? Wegovy's, Novo Nordisk, the manufacturer's own study showed this. And then they're like, so at 60 weeks, people started gaining weight. 68 weeks, they cut it off because then the curve was going up, 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 up. And they need to cut that shit off because presumably it would keep going up, 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 up. And it would show that their medicine is ineffective. And also, a lot of people don't lose any weight at all. Okay, so this exact same pattern we have seen over and over again. It doesn't prove that fatness is a disease. It proves that human bodies do not like to be starved and have their weights artificially manipulated. So Hannah highlighted that last sentence, and I think that's probably the only sentence in all of this that's going to be quoted. Who knows? So does the fact that people fail to lose weight on Wegovy, rather they said, does the fact that people gain weight when they stop taking Wegovy prove that fatness is disease? My answer is no. Also, another thing to think about with diseases that need long-term management. So another thing to think about with diseases that need long-term management. Number one, there is long-term data on the interventions for real diseases, and it has been decided that the potential harm does not outweigh the benefits. So for any condition, you can say, okay, well, here's a medicine, here's an intervention, here's whatever that will help you with that. Okay, and so what is the harm of that? So say if I have had a headache and someone came along and said, have you heard of the guillotine? Actually, we could chop that head off and you would no longer feel that pain of the headache. So I would say, that intervention sounds like the benefits don't outweigh the harm, because I would be going around without a head and I don't need my head. I mean, I'm very amazing with my head. And so then, people would decide, okay, the guillotine is not a good solution for a headache. How about we take a paracetamol? Okay. Seems like the risks don't outweigh the benefits. So 2, we don't have long-term data on Wegovy or Ozempic in high doses for weight loss in non-diabetics. 3, we're also making the presumption that the side effects of Wegovy are worth it for the low temporary weight loss. I don't believe it is, especially when we know it does little to improve health and a lot to risk health. So, as I mentioned in my Wegovy episode, that in Canada, as an example, it has not been approved for public health plans because they said that there is no indication that it improves health. Okay, so there's no indication that it has any type of meaningful improvement to health. Also, and I love that they separated health and weight. There is that low weight loss amount. And then, so that's, if we think about a pair of scales, like the old scales with one weight on one side and weight on another. And so we have, on one side, we have low weight loss and no real improvement to health. Okay, so that's weighing that one side down. On the other scale, we have all of the side effects. And so, there might be a teeny tiny improvement to health, and people might be happy with that low weight loss. So that's the quote benefits. And so on the other side, we have 95% of people experiencing side effects, 10% of people experiencing severe side effects, a black box warning. And so all of that stuff, and I'm just summarizing. And so now you put that stuff on the other side of the scale, that's boom, all the way down. And so there's not that balance to say, okay, it's worth the risk because we've seen good outcomes. Many people say it is worth the risk because being fat is so abhorrent that it's worth risking the life of that fat person to make them temporarily slightly smaller. And that's because the person operating those scales has fat bias in their brain. And so on that other side with the supposed benefits, add on another piece, which is fat bias, then in their mind it levels out. And they're like, okay, well, it's fine to go ahead. So number 4 in this point is, do other interventions for real diseases start failing at 60 weeks, even when you keep taking them? And then after that, what is the solution? So, obviously not every medicine is perfect, and you might try something if you have high blood pressure and it might work for a little bit and then might not work, and you try something else. With this, like what do we just see that, say if you have a pacemaker at 60 weeks, sorry, it's not going to work anymore. What's the solution? There's no other pacemakers, what's the solution? Number 5, how can that then be justifiable? How does that support the idea that fatness is a disease and not just a normal way to have a body? Okay, so then part B of her question here is, she says, they also said thinking of O-word as a chronic disease instead of, quote, a character flaw helps reduce stigma and discrimination based on weight. What are your thoughts on this? So I said, for something to be a disease, there needs to be a set of symptoms and signs in order to diagnose and treat the disease. For people with high blood pressure, for example, there needs to be evidence of blood pressure being elevated. If it is, and if it's not treated, quote, this is from the Mayo Clinic, it can lead to disability, a poor quality of life, or even a deadly heart attack or stroke. Okay. For fat people, the only thing we have in common with each other is that we are fat. If we do not have a set of symptoms that we all share, How can we treat this, quote, disease? What is the outcome if we don't make fat people thin? Every single fat person has a different outcome. Some fat people may die from diseases associated, and I'll come back to that, associated in a minute, with being in a bigger body. And others may never have any conditions or diseases associated with being in a bigger body. So with this, we're saying the only common characteristic is body size. And if we go back to the high blood pressure, so to diagnose high blood pressure, there has to be high blood pressure. And then the high blood pressure will cause these other symptoms, right? Something else that people in common who have high blood pressure have with each other is that they all have a heart, right? So it's like saying everyone with a heart has high blood pressure, therefore we should treat every person with a heart for the disease of having a heart, which could cause high blood pressure or heart attack or stroke or whatever. And the only common thing is that they have a heart. Now, we don't do that because, of course, we wait to see if everyone who has a heart, if they have issues with that heart. Some people who own a heart may never have issues with a heart. Some people that own a heart might go on to have issues with their heart. But we don't preemptively put someone on medication for the condition of having a heart in case one day their heart is sick. And Regan Chastain talks about this as in with cis men who are bald. And so I talk about this. If we're taking arbitrary characteristics of people's bodies and making them a disease, why don't we make baldness a disease? And so I link to Reagan talking about this idea that the bald men have a higher risk of cardiac incidents. It would be absolutely silly and hilarious to say, okay, well, bald men have a higher risk of cardiac incidents, therefore it's because of their bald head. Let's make baldness a disease, and we could give all the bald people wigs or hats, and then that would reduce their risk of cardiac incidents. Right? Of course. Not of course. There's correlation at play. So it turns out whatever makes cis men bald is the same thing that increases their risk of cardiac incidents. I can't remember what it is, but there's something. And so they scientists were able to say, this is a characteristic of someone, and therefore it's not the baldness that's causing the cardiac incidents. Something else is going on. Whereas with fat people, we say, we don't have evidence that fatness is causing this stuff. We don't have that. We're not able to say A plus B equals C. We don't know that fatness, that adipose tissue, causes XYZ. And so fuck it, we're just going to blame them. We're just going to say it is. We're just going to fuck it. Okay. Let's not look into what also causes fatness that could cause, adverse health outcomes. People have been doing that work, obviously, because we have data around that. But what we know is that yo-yo dieting, aka dieting, marginalization, stigma, shame, and subpar healthcare or lack of access to healthcare, because when fat people go to the doctor, they're told to lose weight, can be attributed to poorer health comes for fat people. But with fatness, people are just like, A plus B equals C. If you disagree, then you are silly. I did a little rhyme. So anyway, so I said before I'm going to talk about associated. So associated is really important. We don't have the evidence to show that adipose tissue causes poorer outcomes for fat people. What we know is that dieting, non-evidence-based care, and stigma have clear connections to poorer health outcomes. We also know that, quote, overweight people have reduced mortality compared to, quote, normal weight people. And that is known as the obesity paradox. The paradox being, turns out fat people don't die at these tremendous rates and actually live longer than, quote, normal weight people. This must be witchcraft. And I'm just a kind of quick thing on mortality versus morbidity. You might have seen those two things and what they are. And I just want to I'm quoting here from Healthline. Morbidity is a state of having a specific illness or condition. While morbidity can refer to an acute condition such as respiratory infection, it often refers to a condition that's chronic, long-lasting. Some examples could be diabetes, high blood pressure, stroke, cancer, etc., etc. And so you can have more than one morbidity at a time. And mortality refers to the number of deaths that have occurred due to a specific illness or condition. So number of deaths, mortality. Mortality is deaths. Morbidity is having a specific illness or condition. So you'd say comorbidity. You can say this patient has 3 comorbidities. Comorbidities, so they have asthma, they have cancer, they have high blood pressure, which increases their mortality rates. We can't say that about an individual patient, but let's say as a group. So someone who has the comorbidities, cancer, asthma, and high blood pressure have a mortality rate, because we've looked at the data. I'm making this up. This is not true. I'm just, giving an example. We've looked at the data that their mortality rates are X per 1,000. Okay, so just in case that comes up. And there's a big hoo-ha. If you don't know this story already, about the CDC came out with, so you know how people are like, oh, the leading risk of death is now fatness, or the number 1 cause of cancer is fatness, or the number 2 or whatever. And that we're in an O-word epidemic and all this type of stuff. So this came out from a CDC report that said that we have 400,000 people dead a year because of fatness. And how did they get this number? How many people died who happened to be fat? Oh, fat person got hit by a bus. They died while fat. Therefore, they died of fatness. It wasn't the bus. The bus had nothing to do with it. It was the fact that they were fat. A year later, the CDC came out with another study and said, actually, we fucked up. We had some errors in our statistical analysis. The number was wrong. The number was really wrong. And so in the next one, it says that thus for O-words, overweight and obesity combined, our estimates was 25,814 excess deaths. Big difference from the 400,000. Right? But what is the phrase? The horse has left the car. The horse bolted from the car. The dog ran from the horse. Whatever. It was out. It was a splashy headline. 400,000 people die every year. It's draining our economy. Fat people are awful. A year later, 28,000. Oh, well, fuck that. That doesn't sound exciting and sexy and something that we can write papers. We can sell newspapers. Fuck that. And so we do. Even today, this perpetuates. Isn't it so hilarious? Not hilarious, terrible, awful, but funny to think about these things that we know that fatness is a leading cause of death. Oh, where did it come from? Oh, a debunked study that was corrected. It's like the Popeye thing with spinach, and Popeye would eat loads of spinach, and it just pervasive. Spinach is filled with iron. Spinach does have iron, but there was a mathematical error, and they had the decimal point in the wrong place. Came out, and they were like, spinach is this food that's going to make you fucking Popeye. And it just stuck. They came out later saying, oh, error, the decimal point was the wrong place. But people are like, yeah, whatever, spinach is magical. And of course, there's nothing wrong with spinach, but, it's just these myths that are interesting, or are, we all know. And then actually when we look into it, we're like, oh, huh? What? And that one study from the CDC with all the terrible errors has caused so much harm. Links to these, all of this stuff in the show notes, by the way. What are we on? We are on 158, so fizzfatty.com/158 for that stuff. Okay, anyway, I think, I can talk about this stuff forever, right? All of these, every single one of these points here, has a whole big thing that you can go off on. Okay, so, also, a disease is defined as, quote, any harmful deviation from the normal structure or functional state. That's a quote from Britannica Dictionary. Fatness, this is me now, is a normal way to have a body. Fat people have been around since the beginning of time. The earliest figurines found are often of fat people. Fatness is not a harmful deviation from the normal. Fatness is normal, and what harms fat people is rampant anti-fat attitudes and, quote, treatments. Making fat bodies a problem that needs to be fixed, as they are presumed to be inherently in a disease state, categorically does not reduce stigma. It does the complete opposite. So what the O-word doctors are saying is, if we make it a disease, if we all culturally know it as a disease, then people will not experience stigma, because we will think it's not their fault. Those poor fatties. Oh, bless them. It's not their fault that they're so horrible. Will that reduce stigma? In my opinion, it does the complete opposite. It means that fat people will still have their weight talked about as an issue. It means that we will be denied evidence-based treatments. It means we will be subjected to harmful interventions like Wegovy and stomach amputation surgery and jaw wiring and whatever awful thing that is going to be introduced to the market moving forward. Jaw wiring, I linked to that. That was the University of Otago in New Zealand, collaborating with some British folks who made the dentalism device, which was wiring fat people's jaws shut with magnets. And they were like, this is the best thing that's ever happened. And they did a study on like 3 people for like 3 weeks or something. It was ridiculous. And it turns out the study authors owned the device. Yeah, and that was a couple of years ago. So these people, I mean, they're still coming up with ways. If we think fatness is a disease, it means that we can then get governments to pay for these devices to cure the disease. We do not need any more jaw wiring. We do not need any more stomach amputation. We do not need any more injections and pills and spells to make fat people thin, because fatness is just a normal way to have a body. Healthcare providers who have zero lived experience and or no anti-fat bias training from fat activists are telling other healthcare providers that as long as they say it with a smile and don't blame fat people about their bodies, then their patients won't experience stigma. How can that be possible when the whole premise of fat being a disease is based on fat stigma and being pushed by drug companies and weight loss companies who want to sell the cure? I'm just impressed by my words. Like, yes, Vinny, you said that. That was good. Okay. Hannah then asks, you brought up a good point in the post about the participant breakdown. I read the study and found a majority of the participants were white women, which the authors disclosed as a limitation in the discussion section. Why is it important to have diversity in trials like these? What are the consequences of not doing so? My response, it's not going to be just white women taking the drug. BIPOC folks have a higher instance of being in larger bodies, and alongside anti-fat bias, they also experience racism and all the consequences of being violently marginalized in our society. It is theorized that BIPOC folks have higher weights because of the stigma and oppression they experience. How is giving them non-evidence-based interventions which have not been thoroughly tested on people like them to treat a made-up disease going to reduce that marginalization? Also, what about folks of other genders? What about trans and gender non-conforming people? I didn't say what's the consequences. I've not done the research, and I didn't feel like doing research for the consequences because, I mean, they can't be good, right? Next question. Doctors I spoke to noted a shift in the past few years regarding language around weight in the clinical setting. For instance, shifting from, quote, O-word patient to patient with O-word. Do you see a subtle change like this as effective in combating weight stigma? Why or why not? If not, what more could be done? Where are you seeing gaps in fat folks being heard and seen by medical providers? Likewise, in what ways does the media get this wrong or right? My answer, absolutely, it is not effective in combating anti-fat bias. I just need a moment for the tomfuckery of this. Imagine a slur, a stigmatizing word, and then people saying, ha ha ha, it's gonna cause less stigma because we're gonna put person with in front of that stigmatizing word, and it means that they're a person above the slur. Here's an idea. Here is an idea. How about we just remove that slur? Like, what? And the reason is why we don't remove that slur is because if we, in medical settings, is if we remove that slur and we say that obesity is not the right word to use, we are saying that obesity is an inappropriate way to talk about fat people because the BMI is flawed and fucked up and a eugenicist tool, and that obesity is not a disease. And so those motherfuckers at the drug companies do not want people to have that realization. And so they are meeting them in the middle and being like, yeah, just saying outright that they have O-word. That's mean. Tell them that they're a person before the slur. And then they're going to be like, oh, thank you. Anyway, so that was just me going on a rant. This is continuing on what I said to Hannah. We have seen a shift in recent years because pharmaceutical companies have spent tons of money to market the idea of fatness as a disease. If being fat is not the fault of fat people, then they can make more money getting their interventions in the hands of unwitting healthcare providers who think they are doing best for their patients. They have co-opted fat liberation language and messaging in their marketing, but But one key word they don't want to lose is obesity. That would mean admitting fatness is not a disease, and so they are leaning into using person-first language, which comes from the disability rights community. Person-first language is controversial in that community, as many folks don't see their disability as something bad, and so prefer plain language. There is not a similar split in the fat liberation community, however, around the O words. For almost everyone, they are seen as powerfully harmful as they pathologize bigger bodies. The use of the O words has historically caused tremendous trauma to fat folks. They are so painful that we don't write them out and put them in quotation marks with asterisks. Of course, some people don't like to use the word fat, as it has also been used to harm them, but those in the fat lib community have reclaimed it as a neutral descriptor. We should be listening to the activists with lived experience about what language to use, and not companies who are committed to making money harming us, making us repeat customers, and at times killing us. If healthcare providers learned about weight bias from actual fat people in the fat liberation world versus pharma companies or AstroTurf obesity advocacy groups, which are just mouthpieces for pharma, then they would realize they are causing terrific harm to fat folks, when I'm sure that they are trying to do the opposite. Healthcare providers have biases too, and as soon as they understand that trying to solve weight bias by trying to erase fat bodies, it is violent, the quicker we can get to giving people in bigger bodies the evidence-based care they deserve. And just a pause here, if you're not familiar with AstroTurf advocacy groups, I want to give you a quote from my favorite, Reagan Chastain, her piece on Substack. Is it Substack? Substack. When Doctors' Education is Really Pharmaceutical Industry Marketing, Part 1. Quote, in the obesity summit lineup, because so they had an obesity summit at this hospital, and some of the people who were there emailed Reagan, was like, look at the people who were on the lineup, and they were all being paid by Novo Nordisk or some other drug manufacturing company. Anyway, so in the obesity summit lineup, in addition to taking a ton of money from industries whose products the summit promotes, the speakers, who are physicians, have all pinned their careers to the body size as disease framework, including several who own weight loss clinics. One speaker was the president of the Obesity Action Coalition. This is an AstroTurf organization that purports to be an advocacy group for higher weight people, but is in fact funded by and acting as a lobbying arm for the diet industry. Novo Nordisk is their chief funder. So AstroTurf, and so you know what we know. So you know the term grassroots, a grassroots organization, and so they will position themselves as a grassroots, but so AstroTurf is fake grass, right? In case you're not familiar with it, it's fake grass. So it's a fake organization. I mean, it's a real organization, but it's not a grassroots, local communities coming together. It is something that's funded by the pharmaceutical companies to act as a lobbying arm, because it's harder for Novo Nordisk. So would Novo Nordisk be able to have someone on the panel of this presentation? People would say, there's probably conflict of interest. We hope people would say that. Conflict of interest. But we can have a, quote, advocacy group on there because they are, quote, advocating for fat people. We don't need to look where they're getting the money from. Oh, it's 100% Novo Nordisk? Oh, so it's just a lobbying arm. And a little thing like that really helps companies to get in the door, so people's suspicions are not aroused, because they say, well, it's an advocacy group, right? They just want to help the fat people. No, they just want to sell their shit and pretend that they don't have anything to do with each other. Okay, continuing. Not all healthcare providers are committed to anti-fat bias, however. There are many who are fiercely fighting for the rights and healthcare of their fat patients, and every day they do incredible work to reduce the harm their colleagues have caused. There will be a day when we look back at what we have done to fat people and be ashamed and embarrassed. For an overview on how the media gets it wrong, check out this post. And so I had made a post which was a summary of the bias in media, because she said, how does media get it wrong? And basically, in a nutshell, they talk only to thin people who are advocating for the erasure of fat people, and people with credentials who are dedicated to that too. And they use stigmatizing language like the O word, and they talk about it in the context of health versus the fact that fat people just do other shit versus, need help for health. Next question. In your post, you mentioned that patients could not give informed consent. What did you mean by this? So I replied, because we only have 68 weeks worth of data on Wegovy, and so we have no idea what the outcomes are long term. We can't fully consent when we don't have all the sufficient information. Also, from my anecdotal knowledge, most people are not being told the risk factors. Next, generally, what do you hope for in this sphere? What should the common reader know about anti-fat bias? I said, listen to actual fat activists from the fat liberation community. We have an incredible array of people to learn from: fat doctors, fat dietitians, fat athletes, and people who educate on the harms of anti-fat stigma, who are not being paid by weight loss companies or manufacturers, to name just a few. We all hold biases, even people who mean well. Anti-fat bias is not okay, but declaring fatness is a disease is not the way to go. Give fat people evidence-based care instead of trying to shrink them. Anti-fat bias hurts everyone, no matter their size, and learning it will help everyone. Fat liberation does not mean we want everyone to be fat and unhealthy. It just means we want fat people to have equal rights, belonging, and access, to get evidence-based treatment when we need it, to be free from bias and judgment, to be treated like valuable humans, because we are. And I'm sure that the common reader would think that is a fair ask. And then I've linked to a post I have made on Instagram that's quite popular, which is, I need to change the wording on it actually. I say fat acceptance. I don't like that word anymore, because acceptance is just saying, fine, we'll accept you, versus liberation is more liberatory. And so what fat acceptance, what it isn't: believing everyone should be fat, hating straight sized people, forcing everyone to find fat people attractive, and quote excuse to be quote greedy, lazy, or unhealthy, end quote, a method to teach people to love their body, anti quote health. What it is a social justice movement created to increase the acceptance of fat bodies and seeks to ensure fat people have equal rights and access as straight-sized people. So nefarious, right? Because I guarantee that people will read, anytime anyone reads anything that talks about, maybe let's not hate the fat people, you know there's going to be motherfuckers up in these comments saying, they're just glorifying obesity. They just want everyone to have sex with them. They just want everyone to be unhealthy like them. They just want everyone to die. It's like, what? What? No, we just want to go to the doctor and be able to get treatment. We just want to be able to live, be alive, and not be harassed. Like, just leave us alone, basically. Like, people think that when they hear fat liberation, or they hear a fat person have the audacity to try and say that they might be an equal human to a straight-sized person, they imagine like what is it, Ghostbusters? You remember Ghostbusters and that? Like, was it like the Michelin Man? Like, they imagine this huge fat person stomping through the city and innocent thin people at the feet being crushed under the soul of this evil monster as the fat chubby hands come down and grab up a handful of innocent thin people, stuffing them into their mouths, laughing, and probably lasers shooting from their eyes. And, you know, there's a thin child crying, "Mummy, don't let the fat person get us." And then the fat Michelin person's like, "Ha ha ha, I'm going to eat you," and then swipes down and eats the poor child who's thin. And the sad thin people are just like, "Please don't kill us." Like, that's what they imagine. That's what these motherfuckers imagine, right? Like that, you know, the world is going to become overrun with fat people who are not living in shame. That's the thing, is that they're terrified that fat people don't know their place anymore. Fat people need to be deathly ashamed of themselves. They need to know their place is underneath the good thin people who have their shit together, because you are pathetic, a loser, greedy, all that type of stuff. That's not true. But how dare a fat person say, "Hey, can I get the same things that you're getting, thin person?" How dare they say that? So we need to shame them back down. And that is what's going to happen to a lot of people reading this, is like, we need to shame those motherfuckers down. How dare they ask for equality? How dare they ask us not to hate them and torture them and kill them and tell them while that's happening that they are an awful human piece of shit. Like, that's very triggering for a lot of straight-sized people. And of course, not every straight-sized person. And a lot of people are going to read this and be like, read the article whenever it comes out, if I'm even quoted in it, and be like, "Huh, okay. You know, yeah." And hopefully, I mean, I don't think that line about, "Hey, this is what fat liberation is going to go into the piece." But hopefully people have critical thinking capabilities if this is a new concept to them. Some people will, some people won't. Yeah. So finally, Hannah says, "Anything to add?" And so I say, if someone chooses to take Ozempic, Wegovy to lose weight, I want them to know this: living in the world as a fat person is really hard, even harder depending on your level of privilege. And so it makes sense to take something that will maybe temporarily make you a little bit smaller for some relief. You are a victim of anti-fat hate. You are not a bad person. This is a systemic issue, and you deserve evidence-based treatment free from bias. And then I said, if you want an overview of lots of studies, go here. I don't know why the fuck I haven't spoken about this more. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make this a bonus in Patreon. Yeah. Weight science. So I'm going to make this, it's a huge spreadsheet of weight science. I am going to make that a bonus in Patreon. Not Patreon, fucking Ko-fi. You know what I mean though. Ko-fi! And so it has like links to the studies when they're released, and an excerpt, you know, like what does the study talk about? And it has everything to do with like diets don't work, weight neutral healthcare does work, and all sorts of other stuff. It's fucking juicy as shit. So I'm going to make that a thing of Ko-fi. I'm going to do it before this episode comes out, so it's going to be on there. So go check that out. And that was all of the questions that she asked. And I think that was really fucking good. Okay, that was a really good info in that. Yes, pat on the back there, Vinny. Yes, I feel good about that. Oh, hello, Shame's popping up. Oh, Shame being like, well, you're going to come back later and realise that there was a typo. There was an error. You said a word wrong. Okay, Shame, thank you. I appreciate you trying to keep me safe. But I've got this. It's all good. Oh, Shame. So if you do want the Science Diversity Resource Guide and also the huge fat science thing, Then go to ko-fi.com/fiercefatty/tears, or you can just go to the show notes, fiercefatty.com/158, or probably whatever you're listening on. If you scroll down, it's probably right there. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where this shit goes, but it goes somewhere. Who knows? You can do it. You can find the links and links for everything else that I've spoken about today too. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm really fucking hungry, so I'm going to go eat something and then go pick up my neighbor's dogs next door. Oh, they're so cute. Oh my God. So yesterday, right, I had finished work and then I went to the front door and to put Diggy's leash on, and I hear a scratching. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? Is there a rat at the door? Open the door. My neighbor's 2 dogs there. They're knocking, these motherfuckers are knocking on the door, saying, let me in. I'm like, where are your parents? So I open I'm like, what? No one in sight. So I go in, they're all excited. One of them runs to the food bowl. He eats like he's never been fed before, like huge, getting your mouth open around everything. So I pick the food up. So we pick the food bowl up because Dougie is an intuitive eater. Dougie will just graze, at random times. Yeah, and so then I went to my neighbor's door, and it was open, and I knocked, and he was like, "What? They're at your house?" And he had opened the door to let the grocery delivery in, and the door hadn't shut. And so these motherfuckers had just decided to take themselves off and come knock on my door, because I look after them, right, from like whenever their parents are off somewhere, I'll look after them, and they get a lot of belly rubs and treats and kisses and all that type of stuff around mine. So they like coming round, and so they just went on a jaunt and knocked on my door. And these motherfuckers, and I opened the door, they're like, we win. They weren't out there for long, I think, because I couldn't hear them before, because I was not at the door, because they were scratching quietly, and apparently the door was only open for a few minutes, and so they were safe and everything, and the door was open, so they could have gone back home, but they decided they wanted to go on a little jolly to my house. So anyway, I'm going to go pick them up now, because they've been balking because the parents are out. And that's the good thing about working from home, is like I live in a dog friendly building, and so I can keep an eye on everyone's dogs and make sure that they're okay. But we think that Jackson and Bella are the names. They have worked out that if they balk a lot, I will come and rescue them. And so we think on the days that they are alone, because they're not constantly alone, that they're just like, okay, we're just going to bark lows and get them around so we can go and get some treats and some belly rubs, because we're bored. Like, I don't think they're upset or anything. I think they're just very clever. Anyway, all right. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today. Stay fierce, fatty, and see you in a while, alligator. Goodbye.
Perfect.